It has been about a week since the tragedy in Orlando, and the pain still raw for those closest to what happened. Now, joining me here this morning, Amber Salvador, a clinical psychologist at Sharp Mesa Vista Hospital. Amber, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Well, you know, it's been a few days since what happened, but of course the images, we still see it on TV, online, newspapers. How do you deal with this, especially if you have younger children and teenagers who might have a better grasp of what happened?
You know, it really depends on the age of the child and how much they've been exposed to. So for example, research will show that if you have a child who's 8 and younger and they have really no access to social media, they don't have a cell phone, they don't have a laptop, then less is more. So if they don't really have access and they don't know about the information, it might be better to just not talk to them about the information. However, if you have a child who now has a cell phone, they have access to Facebook, social media, their peers are going to be talking about this. Research suggests it's better that information come directly from the parent or the caregiver versus other forms of information. So with that said, the parent or caregiver would really want to sit down and kind of open a space for the child or adolescent to talk about it, and more so asking them questions like, well, what have you heard? What do you know? And then inviting them to kind of lead the conversation, because in these types of situations, more extraneous details may not be as helpful. But we do want to create like a warm, supportive environment where kids know that they're safe to kind of process and talk about these feelings, because it's naturally going to bring up a lot of fear. So a lot of kids will perhaps show behavioral signs of this fear. It could mean they get kind of avoidant and withdraw, or they get even sometimes clingy and they want that reassurance and they may ask for that reassurance over and over. And really it's good to give children and adolescents that reassurance that you're safe in this home, and that we love you and that you can talk about this stuff. And really providing that support is important at a time like this.
So children, you mentioned the age of 8, should they stay away from images completely? For example, just shut off the TV when they're there with you?
That's a good question. So the thing about images, I was doing some research, and for example with 9/11, it showed that adults and children, the more they watched TV and looked up images about the tragedy, the more distressing reactions that they potentially had. So if a child or adolescent's already been exposed to it, I think talking to them about it is good, but definitely less is more. Not encouraging them to seek out images, because for some folks, especially folks who are predisposed to becoming more sad or more anxious in general, they're likely to have some distress reaction if they see a lot of distressing images.
So young kids, take them outside, play.
Right, play, talk to them. And I think that, you know, if you sit down and talk to your kids about what's going on and kind of provide an honest, open place, the less likely they're going to search this stuff out. I think it's when kids and adolescents don't understand what's going on, then they try to seek stuff out to make sense of it, and that's when they could come across things that could be very distressing.
So let's talk now about the medical professionals and the first responders who were there, who were on scene. What kind of challenges are they going to face in the days, the weeks, even the months ahead?
Yeah, unfortunately, if you're exposed to a tragedy like what happened in Orlando, it's inevitable that you're most likely to experience some symptoms hours, days, even months after this event. The good news, and what I really want to share, is that for most people, those symptoms remit over time. It's only very few that actually will continue having those symptoms longer term. But what you're going to see, what we call in the field, is a re-experiencing of the event, which basically means memories and intrusive images and ruminating thoughts, and that can also come in the form of a flashback, so feeling like they're back in the situation, and also having nightmares, which can disturb sleep. And then obviously if you're thinking about this over and over, it's going to create intense emotions. So initially someone might feel very numb or in shock or even detached emotionally, but then as that wears off into the days, they're going to feel maybe a lot of grief, sadness, anger, guilt is an emotion that comes up for a lot of people. And then also feeling maybe jumpy or hyper reactive or hyper aroused to things that trigger them based on the situation. So for example, I read an article in Orlando that the first responders that came in, there was cell phones going off, right? So my first thought was, moving forward, when they hear a cell phone, their brain might have correlated that scene with the sound of a cell phone ringing. So something like that could create more of that hyperreactivity. And then you're also going to potentially see a withdrawal. People might start to kind of pull into themselves, or people tend to feel very agitated and irritable, so they might start trying to cope through things like food or alcohol or substances. So really what's important and what they find in terms of protective factors is emotional support. And really like being there for these people. And what's good is that what I think we find when tragedies happen is communities come together and unite, and there's a solidarity that forms, which is very much needed in a time like this.
And how would you deal for some people who might have a fear of entering large venues, like clubs or places where people gather? They see what happened in Orlando, worried that something like that could happen where they live.
Yeah, I think that's natural that people would be afraid of going into a nightclub or a large venue or any place that resembles something like this happening. I think the problem is that when people start reacting to that fear, they start living in fear and making decisions based on fear, and then your life becomes very limited. And I think the truth is that no one potentially can control some of these tragedies that happen. We don't necessarily always know that they're going to happen. They happen and we're caught off guard. And so living your life as though these things are going to happen, usually the person that ends up suffering is you. So I would say, yes, it makes sense. You might not want to go to large venues like even grocery stores or things like that. If you want to not go to a nightclub, well, that's your prerogative. But I would say you don't want to limit your life. You don't want to let these instances keep you from going and living your life, because then the fear and the hatred is in control versus you taking charge of your own life.
Amber, thank you. All good information. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Melissa Masiha for this week's San Diego Newsmakers with 10 News.